Hello students, welcome back to my class. Today we are going to study the two diary entries of Alice James. Alice James, as you know, was an American diarist who was also the youngest sister of the novelist Henry James, as well as the philosopher and psychologist William James. The position of Alice James in the world of literature is unique because she brought into the literature that type of writing which many view as controversial when the English literature was under the influence of Victorian morality or was suffering from Victorian prudery. And it was also the time when women writers were emerging in a significant manner. But still, there was a lot to go on their part to be compared with their male counterparts or to make an impression on the literary scenario along with the overall societal experiences. And Alice James, who died young at the age of 44, had maintained a diary for the last 7 years of her life when she was suffering acutely both physical and psychological bouts. And her suffering was there from her early youth. But as in those days, any suffering on the part of women, and particularly the inconsistency of their expressions with the conventional societal norm, brought the idea of hysteria or hysteric. So Alice James was also diagnosed with hysteria, and in her diary entries we find that she is trying to struggle with this conventional diagnosis or this conventional identification, and she is trying to express her own strong individual self and its complexities of troubles within it. So, in our syllabus, we have two of our entries. One is on October 26th, 1890, and another was on May 31st, 1891. In the first entry, which is titled as My Hidden Self, she is talking about her brother William. William uses an excellent expression when he says in his paper on the hidden self that the nervous victim abandons certain portions of his consciousness. It may be the word commonly used by his kind. So she is talking about Williams as a person dealing with the psychology or a psychologist who is having a very universal idea about the struggling individual who suffers from such illness. And he is identifying this as the hidden self, the nervous victims abandon certain portions of consciousness, and he is talking about abandoning the portions of consciousness. But Alice James is trying to counter that by telling, I have passed through an infinite succession of consciousness abandonments and in looking back now I see how it began in my childhood, although I wasn't conscious of the necessity until 67 or 68 when I broke down first. So she is talking about her first experience of breaking down, this nervous breaking down, and that general perception of abandoning the consciousness. As I lay prostrate after the storm with my mind luminous and active and susceptible of the clearest, strongest impression. But she is telling that when she had undergone such experiences, she had her mind very luminous and active. And it is having the clearest and strongest impressions of what she was going through in those moments. It was a fight simply between my body, my will, a battle in which the former was to be victorious to the end. And she is describing this traumatic experience as a battle between her body and her mind, where the body is becoming victorious. It is giving up, and the mind couldn't cope with it. Owing to some physical weakness, excess of nervous susceptibility, the moral power pauses as it were for a moment and refuses to maintain muscular sanity. And she is talking about her own experiences in these crises between the willpower and the moral power, where the moral power pauses. As I used to sit immovable reading in the library with waves of violent inclination suddenly invading my muscles, taking some one of their myriad forms, and how she was going through the feelings, the intuitive experiences of committing suicide or homicide, particularly her homicidal intention about her old father, Henry James the Senior. Probably it was her rebellious spirit against the conventional approach of her father that made him being homicidal. And I had not only all the horrors and sufferings of insanity, but the duties of doctors, nurse, and the straitjacket imposed upon me too. And she was struggling between the societal norms imposed on her and her desire in this struggle to abandon her body and to think clearly what is going on within her. On one part, she was to surrender to the physical sufferings, and on the other part, she was trying to make herself physically appear to be conventionally dispensing her role as a woman, or how she looks even in her illness. That was the concern of the society or the societal norm. Let the dikes break and flood sweep in, acknowledging yourself abjectly important before the immutable laws. So she was hoping that she will be surrendering to those impulses of given moment to abandon all, let the dikes break. When all one's moral and natural stock in trade is a temperament forbidding the abandonment of an inch or the relaxation of a muscle, it is a never ending fight. But as a woman, she has to undergo that fight. On one end, she has to maintain the physical decorum that the society expects, and on the other, she has to respect her own individual feelings of surrendering to the urges that was coming through her body. When the fancy took me of a morning at school to study my lessons by way of variety instead of sticking or wriggling through the impossible sensations of upheaval, violent revolt in my head overtook me, so that I had to abandon my brain as it were. And when this type of violent upheavals or sensations of upheavals are encountered by her, she had to abandon her brain. She stops thinking about and she surrenders to those sensations that was coming through her physical turmoil. So it has always been anything that sticks of itself is free to do so, but the conscious and continuous cerebration is an impossible exercise. And she is telling that though she tried her best, but the continuous cerebration, the thought process and its consciousness, it was impossible to be maintained. From just behind the eyes, my head feels like a dense jungle into which no ray of light has ever penetrated. And she felt as if her brain is like a dense forest where the light never penetrates, nothing can be visible. So with the rest, you abandon the pit of your stomach, the palms of your hand, the soles of your feet, and refuse to keep them sane, when you find in turn one moral impression after another, producing despair in the one, terror in the other, anxiety in the third, and so on until life becomes one long flight from remote suggestion and complicated eluding of the multifold traps set for your undoing. So at the end of this entry, she is producing in her brilliant literary style the anguish, the sufferings which are very ordinarily expressed by the societal language. And we can say that Ellis James was as brilliant as John Keats, who also had undergone similar type of experiences, but who produced beautiful poetry out of his sufferings. So here also Ellis James is producing beautiful prose by giving her physical sufferings, her mental anxieties and agonies into a beautiful expression of struggle between the dichotomies within her conscious self. But moreover, she is not just talking like the Victorian moralist about the dichotomy of what is sane, insane, decent, ugly, so on and so forth. Rather, she is trying to produce a seamless experience where she is touching both at the same time, simultaneously undergoing the opposite experiences within the self, and is trying to bring out the essential nature of woman. So in her writing, we find that she is a type of feminist, or we can say early feminist writer, who is trying to give a particular language, a particular expression to the female experiences in spite of the conventional social approaches predominating in her time. And she is talking about the despair, the terror, the anxiety, and so on and so forth that she is encountering in this state of her being. In the second encounter, which is she is talking about her falling health, that the time of her death is approaching. Therefore, it is titled Going Downhill. And she is talking about my aspirations may have been eccentric, but I can't complain now that they have not been brilliantly fulfilled. Ever since I have been ill, I have longed and longed for some palpable disease, no matter how conventionally dreadful a label it might have. So there is the blend of irony, and she is trying to undermine the Victorian prudery, that how the Victorian people, they were trying to associate themselves with anything that is having a sort of significance, even in the field of diseases. So she is telling that she also wanted or longed for some palpable disease because her illness was not diagnosed properly. She wanted some big title of disease to it. And finally, which that sympathetic being the medical man had no higher inspiration than to assure me I was personally responsible for washing his hands of me with a graceful complacency under my very nose. Dr. Torrey was the only man who ever treated me like a rational being. And she is talking about Dr. Torrey, who treated her like a rational being, but all other doctors or medical people, they thought her to be suffering from that conventional concept of hysteria and all these things, and washing their hands, that nothing could be done in this regard, as the treatment was not developed at that time. I was victim to many pains that I was of necessity an arrested mental development too. And what the doctor diagnosed? That she was a victim of many pain or aches and an arrested mental development. Notwithstanding all the happiness and comfort here, I have been going downhill at a steady trot. So they sent for Sir Andrew Clark. Andrew Clark, the famous physician of that time, was called to diagnose her when her condition had deteriorated severely, and she was diagnosed with a lump in one of my breast for 3 months. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, cardiac complications, and the tumor giving the great pain that nothing can be done for me but to alleviate pain, that it is only a question of time. The doctor declared that she is only the guest of the time for some time. And this with a delicate embroidery of the most distressing case of nervous hyperesthesia. She has also she had also been identified with nervous hyperesthesia added to spinal neurosis, and there was also spinal neurosis that has taken me off my legs for 7 years. For 7 long years she had not been out of her bed, with attacks of rheumatic gout in my stomach for last 20, ought to satisfy the most inflated pathologic vanity. And she is telling that I had so many diseases, and all these diseases were very new in terms of their identification or the scientific discoveries. So, very ironically, she is talking about her pride of being the victim of so many diseases which had given her a status. It is decidedly indecent to catalog oneself in this way, but at the same time, she is telling, I don't want to catalog myself as the victim of cancer, tumor, rheumatic gout, or so on and so forth. But I put it down in a scientific spirit to show that though I have no productive worth, I have a certain value as an indestructible quantity. But she is talking that she may not have any productive worth for humanity. She may not be a productive individual for humanity because she had suffered all her life. But she had a certain value as an indestructible quantity, not quality. So, what is that indestructible quantity? That after all, she is an individual who had undergone all these experiences and which she is able to narrate through her diary writing, and which is invaluable for the latter generation to know what exactly goes through the mind of such victims, and particularly when that victim is a woman for whom the society has not cared to allow any space or time to narrate these experiences. So, these both the writings are rebellious writings. They are trying to assert the feminine spirit, the feminine identity in its unique position, in its unique experience of undergoing the dreaded diseases and at the same time undergoing the social scrutiny of moral behavior in her physical and mental aspects. So, Alice James can be recorded as one of the pioneering feminist writer who wants to rebel, who wants to deconstruct the writings in 19th century, the writings that was imposing on the women writers in particular and women in general the patriarchal values, the patriarchal expectations. So, from these two diary entries, we can expect the questions like the diary entries. From them, we can examine the relationship between the act of writing and bodily experiences, the female identity and Victorian ethos. Or the question can be, can we consider Alice James as a feminine icon in writing about the woman's self and its complexities? So, I hope you people can do justice by citing the examples from these two writings where she is bringing out very brilliantly all her experiences from a very acutely conscious mind. Though she is suffering physically, but her mind is very much conscious, and the struggle between her willpower and moral power and all those dichotomies surrounding her are narrated very brilliantly and with certain imageries which are very invaluable, which in comparison to the general writing are very striking. I hope you will be able to do justice to this. Thank you.